Hey guys, Coronavirus with George here. It's 9 o'clock on April 12th, Easter Sunday. Here are the numbers 1.85 million cases worldwide, 114,000 deaths, 423,000 recovered. Now, I wanted to look at the numbers for the United States. The numbers seem to continue to improve. The number of new cases as a percentage of yesterday's cases, right? The day over day increase. It's 5.2%. That's the lowest it's been so far since March 2nd, as long as I've been keeping track. And so that's good news. And if we look at the graph of that, right, this does look like plateau, right? The flattening, flattening means squishing the plateau lower, right? But it does look like we've hit the peak and maybe even come down off it, at least 2 days in a row of lower numbers than the highs here. Now, this could come back up and flatten out for a while. This could continue to drop. It could come up higher. I tend to believe that maybe the social distancing is working, and so maybe this will come down, but all I can really do is look at the numbers. So that's relatively good news. The day-over-day rate of deaths has actually decreased also, down to 7.4% day-over-day increase. And the number itself was actually significantly smaller. It was 1,500 versus, I think, 2,000 the day before, a couple days ago. Yeah, not the day before, but 4 days ago. Right, 3 days ago, sorry, we had over 2,000. So we see, it seems like we've peaked in the number of deaths at 2,307 4 days ago, and then 3 days ago, and then we're coming down now to 1,528, 1,528 for today. So looking at this graph, if this was the peak, right, and the area under the curve is the number of deaths, then if we assume something somewhat symmetrical on the other side, then perhaps maybe this is around what we were probably at about 16,000 this day. So then maybe the total deaths might only be 32,000 or something in that range in the near future. And then once we come out of lockdown, who knows what happens after that. Hopefully there's a treatment by then that will change things. All right, so that's the United States. Let's look at a few other things here. I wanted to look at France has been moving up quickly, but today wasn't so bad for them, 3,000 new cases. You'll notice all the major players who've been jumping up the charts have kind of slowed down. UK, 5,000. UK has been rapidly moving up. They just passed China today. And Turkey, you remember I've been mentioning them, is moving up very rapidly, and I think they will pass Iran, and I'm almost sure they'll pass China, probably sometime this week. Now, Turkey, I think, has finally issued a stay-at-home order. I think it was yesterday, and it's a 48-hour stay-at-home order, and I don't know all the details of how theirs is going to work, but and I don't know if it's just in the major cities or if it's in the country, the rural areas also. But I suspect that they will probably want to do more of that because a 2-day lockdown isn't going to do very much. Plus, the day before a lockdown, you get all these people rushing into grocery stores and probably a little bit more spread, and so you may even see a spike. So the benefit of having a 2-day lockdown seems dubious. All right, Russia, if you look at the countries that are near it, right, seems to have a pretty high number of new cases. I listened to a news story from Russia. The doctors seemed to suggest that what the government was reporting was nonsense and that their cases were much higher. And if I remember in a second, I'll talk a little bit more about numbers. Sweden has no official lockdown either, and I've been mentioning how Turkey hasn't, but Sweden, it seems maybe it's just working for them. I looked it up today. Their per capita population density, is 64 per square mile, 64 people per square mile, which is, kind of on the moderately low side. Their largest city has just under 1 million people. And I wonder, in situations like that, is some sort of social distancing without an official lockdown or stay-at-home order, is that effective in countries that have small populations and low population densities and no major cities. And maybe it is, maybe it's not. Some of the articles I read were comparing them and saying their numbers were higher than Denmark, but you know, if we think that really that we have to have stay-at-home orders, then we should think that countries that don't have them should be skyrocketing, and Sweden doesn't look especially high. You can see they're testing 5,000 per million people. That's a decent amount. It's normal. I think the U.S. is at 8,000 per million. You notice Korea up here, 10,000 per million. Higher, but not that amazingly huge number that we thought of it as before. And I think what happened with Korea is, even though they've only tested a little bit more per million than, say, the United States has, I think South Korea had caught it early, and so they're testing. They were catching a lot of the few cases that were out there and then isolating those people. And so it was much more effective in just isolating people and putting them away and preventing the spread. We're testing in the United States, but we already have a huge number of cases, so it's sort of testing people who are already sick instead of going out and testing the general public, just, kind of surveillance testing, they call it, where you just go into a town and start testing a bunch of people. In the U.S., you still have to have symptoms to get tested, at least where I live. Japan's another one I want to watch. Japan apparently doesn't have a lockdown order either, and we know Japan has large cities. Tokyo is one of the largest in the world, and I think Japan has something like 125 million people. Don't quote me on that number, but they have a decent-sized population. And so you would think it would be spreading. Now we come over here to the tests per million, and Japan has only tested 612 people per million. That's a pretty low number, and so I wonder if this number is low because they simply aren't testing people. If it is, then this will eventually, numbers can only lie for so long. It'll eventually show up here, right? Because if they're lying because they're just not testing people, then we're just going to see hospitals overwhelmed. And then that brings us back to the question of do the numbers make sense? And I think, for any country on this list, we would have to assume, logically, the total number of cases will be higher than the confirmed cases, right? Because unless somebody lied and said we have more than what we confirmed, that doesn't seem to make sense. But realistically, you think you test people, and unless you've tested every person in the country, right, the number of confirmed cases is going to be less than the number of people who have it, because you wouldn't have caught everybody who has it. So the U.S., let's say we have 560,000 cases. I've been starting to wonder if we're really number one in this category, or if maybe we just happen to be the most honest in this category. And I don't know. I suspect the real number of cases in the U.S. is probably more like 5 million, maybe even 10 million. I don't know. Probably not 10, but probably on the order of 5 million. That's kind of my assumption. And I base that a little bit on numbers, kind of on the number of dead, right? Because Dr. Fauci seemed to be of the opinion that the mortality was somewhere in the order of 1%. And I try to go based on things that I hear him say, because he is an expert and I'm not. And already, if it were 1% and we have 22,000 dead, right, 22,000 times 100, that gives us 2.2 million. And this number, even if we just look at the cases we have today, if we stop getting new cases tomorrow, more people who are already in the hospital today will still die. So let's say we snapped our fingers and no one else got infected for the rest of eternity, this number would probably still go up to 25, 30, 35, 40,000, something, maybe 50,000, who knows. But it would be higher than it is right now. Some people in the hospital won't make it, right? That's sad, but that's reality. So, whatever that number would be, if we assume a 1% mortality, then it should be 100 times that number actually have the infection. So I would think 4 or 5 million, maybe 3 million. It's something like that. I would say it's in the single-digit millions, but more than 2 or 3, I would think. So that's my guess for the United States. And then I think for a lot of these countries, I know Italy didn't start catching up and doing surveillance testing, going out and looking for healthy people to test until things started to get under control a few days ago. At least that's what I heard on the news. And so I think, you look at them, their numbers are going up even though their deaths are actually starting to decrease, because now I think they're just picking up people who are actually healthy and getting tests out there. So maybe their number is significantly higher too, right? Maybe their actual number might be a couple million infected people. And Spain, right? Same sort of thing. And let's skip a few of these here. China, right? So China reported 82,000. Some news reports have suggested the actual number of dead might be 40,000. I don't know if anybody knows. I don't know if we'll find out. With every country on this list, these things have to be taken with a grain of salt. Let's assume it's 40,000. Let's assume a 1% mortality. These are both assumptions. That would put this number at somewhere close to 4 million, right? So, who knows, right? And that's why I say, are we really number one? Maybe we're not. Maybe we're top 2 or 3, and maybe we're just, reporting somewhat accurately what's happening as opposed to some countries that maybe aren't. And I could be wrong, but I think a lot of people have suggested that this number seems very low, and when you see how smaller countries shot past it very quickly, and anecdotally the scenes in the countries looked similar, you kind of think China's probably just making up some numbers that are lower than what they actually were, so they wouldn't sound so bad. And also, we'll be watching for the second wave in China. Iran, I kind of wonder about them too. I don't know. What else do we want to look at? I talked about, yeah. So I think a lot of these countries, India has a very low number of people tested per million. But of course, they have a huge population, so doing 200,000 tests is still going to give you a low number per million. So we have to wonder. India went into a lockdown immediately when they saw cases. Probably a smart thing to do. You have to assume a country with 1.4 billion, I think, people. 1.3, 1.4, something like that. This is going to be really bad there, and a lot of the country's poor. And a lot of it's not. I haven't been to India. I know there's more advanced parts of the country too, but there is a lot of poor people in very overcrowded cities, and it's good. I think in the long term we're going to see that it's going to look really bad in countries like that, Bangladesh, and some of these poorer countries that have very big populations for their size. So those are my thoughts for tonight. Things to look into. I do still think we'll see Turkey moving up the list. The UK too, unfortunately, is probably going to get up here into the 150, 200,000 range. But the numbers are starting to look better for a lot of countries. They're starting to slow down here in the number of new cases. So that's good news. And hopefully we find a treatment for this soon. And that's it. So sorry for such a long video. If you stayed with me, thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay home, like and subscribe. Take care.